These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare, Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down and, as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suffering into our body.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
My friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way, and those of you who believe in abortion rights. As the old saying goes, all hell has officially broken loose. Politico last night published a draft report, a 96 or 98-page draft, not report, a decision written by Justice Sam Alito, one of the hardcore right-wingers on the court. I'm trying to be very careful in my language here. Basically saying that, you know, it's not up to the court to make law. With Roe v. Wade, the court did make law. We are officially undoing Roe v. Wade. The word abortion does not exist in the Constitution, and therefore it's up to the states. That's the essence of the decision. Now, one of the main reasons why this has so many people flipped out, well, actually, there's multiple reasons. Reason number one, of course, is that carrying a child to term is 14 times more deadly than getting an abortion. And that's for a healthy woman of normal childbearing age. If that woman is a girl who's 11 years old or 12 years old, or a woman in her 50s who's still fertile but wasn't planning on getting pregnant, who got raped or had a failure of birth control, it's not 14 times more deadly to carry a child to term. It becomes massively more deadly. So number one, of course, there's this whole issue of the simple right, the health care right to abortion for women in the United States. That is about to be taken away. And we've got 21 states, I believe it is, probably soon to be 26 states, that already have in place trigger laws or laws equivalent to trigger laws that will immediately criminalize abortion the day that the Supreme Court decision is handed down. Now, all that said, the Supreme Court itself just came out, John Roberts just came out and said this is a terrible breach of trust that they released this thing. But yeah, it's true. He also noted that this is not the final decision. It can still be tweaked. Now, the question is, will this outpouring of public opinion that's happening right now, which, by the way, has a precedent back in the 1930s, and I'll get to that in just a moment. The question is, will this outpouring of public opinion cause the 6 conservatives on the court to go back and say, well, you know, maybe John Roberts was right. We should just, you know, go along with Mississippi. You know, what Roe v. Wade did was it established fetal viability as the threshold, and that back in the day was around 24 weeks. And then in 1992, you had Casey versus Planned Parenthood, and what that decision did was it established 3 trimesters with different rules for each trimester. So let's just kind of wipe those things out and kind of go back to the original Roe decision. This is John Roberts' logic. Go back to the original Roe decision, and instead of saying fetal viability, whatever that may be, which is like right now 22 weeks or 20 weeks, let's change that to 14 weeks like Mississippi says, and we'll just go along with Mississippi. Now, frankly, I doubt that Amy Coney Barrett, who called herself a handmaid in the Catholic cult that she was part of before she became a member of the Supreme Court, is going to go along with that. And by the way, let me just be very clear. Somebody last week sent me an email going, how come you're always slurring Catholics? You must hate Catholics. This is terrible. This is bigotry. No, I don't always slur Catholics. I love Catholics. I met Pope John Paul II. I was very honored. I spent several hours, you know, sitting within 30 feet of him, had a private audience, spoke with him, shook his hand, as did my wife. I grow up Catholic, but I have great respect for the Catholic Church and for my Catholic friends. But the Catholic Church has put hundreds of millions, worldwide billions of their own dollars behind efforts to criminalize abortion in every country in the world, including the United States. So the only context, you will not hear me using the word Catholic in the context of pretty much anything else outside of abortion and birth control, because they are arguably the world's largest lobbying group for criminalizing hormonal birth control and criminalizing abortion. So let's just be very clear about that. And every single member of the court, you've got two people who are Jewish on the court, Elena Kagan and Stephen Breyer. Neil Gorsuch was raised Catholic. He married a woman who was Episcopalian, and when he was asked what his religion was, he refused to say. He said, we go to the Episcopal Church. So he goes to his wife's church. But the Episcopal Church calls itself Catholic. They just don't recognize the authority of the papacy. So basically, we've got 7 Catholics on the court, and all the rest, everybody else on the court is a church-going Catholic. So you've got 7 Catholics on the court and 2 Jews, and here we are. So, all that said, this is, I forgot where I was going before I went off on that rant. Oh yeah, the bottom line here is that, and the biggest concern is not just that this is going to criminalize abortion, but that the logic that they are using, which is essentially that the court should not be making law, a logic with which I agree. Back in when I wrote The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, I pointed out that in 1973, when Roe v. Wade was passed, Congress in 1974 should have put it into law. That's their job. They never did. They just sat around and said, oh, that's cool, Supreme Court's got this. When Oberfeld, and I know I'm mispronouncing it, I can never figure out how to correctly pronounce that case, the case that gave us gay marriage. When that was passed, Congress should have passed a law and put it into law. They haven't. I mean, there are when Lawrence v. Texas was passed, and gay sex, basically defined in that ruling as sodomy, was legalized. It should have been put into law. It wasn't. When Griswold versus Connecticut was passed in 1965, this was in 1965. It was illegal. It was a crime in Connecticut for a married couple to have a condom in their bedroom. Let that sink in. Birth control pills had only been legal for 4 years. It was illegal to have any kind of birth control device in your home in Connecticut in 1965. The Supreme Court struck it down in that case, in Griswold v. Connecticut. And again, Congress never made it into law. They just sat back and said, oh, the Supreme Court's got this. So now you've got a conservative majority Supreme Court, and they're saying, hey, we agree with Hartmann. The Supreme Court should not be making law. Congress should be making law. And Congress never made these laws, so we're going to just reverse this stuff. And I'm telling you, abortion is here, or we're within 2 months of the end of abortion rights. What's next is going to be abortifacient drugs. In other words, abortion by taking a pill in the first couple months of pregnancy, and morning after pills. Those are clearly and loudly in the crosshairs of the anti-abortion crowd. What will be next after that is hormonal birth controls, which, again, the Catholic Church is lobbying against. And now they have been joined by the white evangelical movement. The evangelicals, up until 1980, were supportive of abortion rights and birth control. With the Reagan, and so was Ronald Reagan. He signed the most liberal abortion law in the history of the United States in California as governor. And George Herbert Walker Bush, his wife was like on the board of or somehow affiliated with Planned Parenthood. They were all pro-abortion rights, right to choose, and pro-birth control. But Reagan cut a deal with Jerry Falwell and Ralph Reed and these right-wing religious guys that they would pitch Reagan from the pulpit in their churches if in exchange he would come out and be anti-abortion. And that's been the Republican Party's position ever since 1980. 42 years. And now they've got what they want. So what do we do about this? In my mind, there are two solutions. There are two ways, well, arguably three ways, that we can deal with this crisis. And it very much is a crisis. And I will outline them on the other side of this break. So stick around. There are three things we can do. Obviously, get out everyone to vote and prevent Republicans from seizing control of the House, the Senate, and in 2 years, the White House. Because you know what they're going to do. They're all telling you. They're singing it from the house, from the rooftops. Number one. We'll get to the other two in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Here's a hint. They have to do with packing the court and passing laws. Stick around. And welcome back. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind today?
Well, how you doing, Tom?
I'm well. What's up?
You know I had to call about this because I'm upset about nobody's mentioned the HIPAA laws.
The HIPAA laws? The privacy,
Yeah.
Your medical privacy laws? Okay. How do
Yes.
what do they have to do with us, with all this?
Well, how does the government find out what my wife's going in for? She could be going in for some minor procedure that has to do with either having a baby or an abortion.
Well, the government doesn't have to. The government doesn't have to do that, Corky. They just have to offer a $10,000 bounty, and your next door neighbor, whose wife is friends with your wife, and who she shared that with, he's the one who now will file the lawsuit and get the $10,000.
Well, how does she know? Because the HIPAA laws.
Because your wife told her.
Well,
I mean, this is kind of a sexist scenario, where the husband is in favor of abortion or is opposed to abortion, and the wives are, but for purposes of discussion, that's one way to get around the HIPAA laws.
Well, I don't think they should be able to get around it. I couldn't find out what was wrong with my brother because I wasn't on the list.
Right. Yeah. No, this is going to present some very, very interesting challenges, shall we say? So, Corky.
Well, I'm disappointed at the intelligence of the politicians for not bringing this up.
Yeah. Well, the
only way you can find out is.
You're right, and the HIPAA law is a privacy law, and Roe v. Wade was a privacy law. You're absolutely right, Corky. The two are intertwined. Thank you very much. Skip in Muskegon, Michigan. Hey, Skip, what's up?
Well, I was born and raised a Catholic, and I know what the Catholic Church says about abortion, but I also know that there truly is a separation between church and state. God even said this to the Jews when they wanted a king. He said,
and Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Render unto God what is God's.
Yep. And in a democracy, if this is truly a democracy, we all have free will. And we have freedoms. God says we have free will. We have choices. If you want an abortion, fine. If you're like me, a Catholic, and you're told you can't have an abortion other than, if the baby's going to kill the woman, the church says, you have to have an abortion. Mm. You can't allow yourself to be murdered by the birth of the child, things like this. But why does the state feel that it has the right to tell people what they can and can't do with their bodies?
Because the people who are driving this process, Skip, believe that a zygote is a human life. And this all boils down to this debate over when human life begins. The Catholic Church believes it begins at the moment that the husband and wife, and it has to be a husband and wife, decide that they're going to hop into bed and make whoopee, and therefore there shouldn't be birth control. Others believe that it begins at the moment of fertilization. Others believe it begins at the moment of implantation in the uterus. Others believe it begins at the moment of fetal viability. Others believe it begins at 6 weeks, when a little cluster of cells that will ultimately become a heart start to twitch. I mean, this is the debate. When does life begin? Skip, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan presidency, one of our two senators from Oregon here, Mark Hatfield, wrote an op-ed for the Oregon Territory newspaper about the new right, about this whole movement that had seized the Republican Party. And in it, he called them out for escalating nuclear arms, for opposing the Equal Rights Amendment, for opposing abortion, for supporting school prayer, and for their argument that if you weren't on their side, you were not patriotic. He also goes into a long rant about how they're exploiting religion for political purposes, and he thinks it's damaging Christianity as well as America. And then finally he says, finally, persistent threats of racism lie directly below the surface of new right ideology. And then he goes into this whole rant about that. It's really extraordinary how, what Reagan was doing is coming back into vogue. I got a whole video about the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Okay, so welcome back. So what do we do about this situation? There are a couple of very specific action steps. The first and most obvious is keep Republicans away from the levers of power. Make sure you're registered to vote. Turn out to vote this fall like there was never any other election as important in the history of America, because it may well be true. Step number one. Step number two, pass a law legalizing abortion. Take the Roe v. Wade decision and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, basically the parameters that are found in those laws with the 3 trimesters and the whole kit and caboodle, which has served this country very well for almost 50 years, 49 years now. Take those 2 Supreme Court decisions, turn them into a law, and put it before Congress, and yes, it will probably require overriding the filibuster to pass it. But Kyrsten Sinema is a co-sponsor of abortion rights legislation. And I doubt Joe Manchin wants to get on the wrong side of this one, although it's hard to say. And I know that there are Democratic senators in Congress who are wishy-washy or even opposed to abortion rights. Are they willing to stand up on this? I doubt it. In other words, stand up against Congress. Chuck Schumer says he is going to put such legislation before the Senate. You can bet your bottom dollar Nancy Pelosi is doing the same thing in the House. The problem, and that's a good strategy, and it needs to be done. It should have been done, as I said in the earlier part of this rant, it should have been done back in 1974 after Roe v. Wade was passed. But that law will only stand as long as you have any one of the 3 branches is the wrong word, institutions that make laws controlled by Democrats. If Republicans get control of the House and the Senate, both branches of Congress, the Article 2 branches, Article 1 branches, and they get control of the Article 2 branch, the White House, all bets are off. They'll just reverse it. In 2024, let's say in 2024, Republicans take the House, the Senate, and the White House. In 2025, they just pass a law saying, hey, we're just reversing all this stuff. And by the way, while we're at it, let's not just put abortion rights into law. Let's put gay marriage into law federally. And let's put gay sex into law legally. In other words, you can no longer prosecute gay LGBTQ people for having sex that's not normal, straight, heterosexual. I mean, these things have not been put into law. But again, the Republicans will be able to reverse them. Which brings me to option number 3, which I wrote about at some length today in my rant over at HartmannReport.com, which is titled, Federal Abortion Ban Court Packing Should Be Back on the Table. And in that article, I basically say everything that I've said to you already. Plus, I point out that back in the 1930s, the Supreme Court was striking down Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal legislation left and right. And there was this group of members of the Supreme Court who were known as the Four Horsemen, right? Pierce, Butler, James, Clark McReynolds, George Sutherland, and Willis Vanderveer. And then they had a sidekick. His name was Owen Roberts, who, were just striking down all kinds of stuff. They took down the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which hurt farmers all across the country, stabilized farm prices. They took down the National Industrial Recovery Act, which gutted, basically, this is 1935. Keep in mind, Roosevelt came into office in 1933 and started the process of ending the Great Depression. The Supreme Court undid it. And so Roosevelt came out and said, okay, we're going to pack the court. We're going to replace everybody over 70 with a new justice and let the old guys all collectively have one vote. It created such an explosion that Justice Owens, the 5th guy among the Four Horsemen, changed his vote and started voting with Roosevelt. Now, if the court reverses themselves before this decision comes out, then we're going to have almost a perfect historical parallel. I'm not counting on that. So the option, I think, is to actually follow through with what Roosevelt didn't have to follow through on, but threatened, which is expand the size of the court, add 4 more justices, and do it now.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This can be done, by the way, with a simple majority in the House and the Senate and the president's signature. All they have to do is blow up the filibuster.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scott poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap and trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that y'all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Oh, this is hysterical. Sarah Burris over at Raw Story is writing, Sam Alito cites the judge who executed women for witchcraft and legalized spousal rape in his Supreme Court draft decision. Sir Matthew Hale. Right. This is exactly, well, you've heard my rant. I'll just leave it at that. By the way, I also posted my op-ed this morning over on Daily Kos, and several people have come in and said, you shouldn't say packing the court. You don't use those words out loud. You should say expand the court. And, you know, I'll leave that up to Chuck Schumer. But I guarantee you, the minute you say expand the court, the Republicans are all going to scream, he's going to try to pack the court. It's packing the court. It's court pack. And that's going to be the word that everybody uses. So let's just own it. It's like saying liberal, you know, or something else. I mean, anyway, I'm fine with it. But, you know, if you want to call and say, oh, you should have said expand the court rather than pack the court, that's, you know, that's fine. Maybe I should have. But I'm leaving it where it is right now. So let me pick up your phone calls. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. Hey, Margie, what's on your mind today?
I think the one thing that I have not heard on any of the reporting, and I think this is being missed, is a key phrase that was used several times in this decision. And that key phrase is unborn human. That is a code word for personhood for embryos and fetuses. Right,
which makes women second-class citizens. They are now toaster ovens for actual humans who have the priority rights.
I've had this rant on your show before. I'm going to have it again. Women, if this stands, will have no bodily agency. All decisions, be it medical, be it lifestyle, can be regulated for all women of childbearing years. You have cancer, you're of childbearing years, you can't have chemo because that could harm a fetus. And since it takes a few weeks, you know, month or 6 weeks, whatever, to determine if you're pregnant or not, you can't have chemo. All of the medications that are advertised on TV, all of them say, do not take if you are pregnant or could possibly become pregnant, as it could create harm to the fetus. And they actually use unborn child.
Right.
Women can be denied all of those medications. You want to drink, you're a female of childbearing year, they can outlaw smoking, drinking, using pot, because all of those things can harm a fetus. Driving a car over the speed limit. Oh, if you're pregnant and get in a car crash, you could harm a fetus. Therefore, you can be charged higher than a man driving a car. this unborn human personhood bill, literally from the time of menses to the time of menopause, removes all rights from all women.
Yeah, I wouldn't say all rights, but I would say many rights. Yes, I agree.
If you don't have agency of body, the rights to your own body, you have no rights. We will literally have less rights than a dead corpse because that corpse had to have a donor thing signed prior to death, or their organs cannot be used.
Yeah.
Yet women can be forced to spend 9 months supporting another life.
Yeah, I'm not disputing what you're saying, Margie. What I am saying is that you will still have a right to vote, and we need to exercise that.
Are you sure about that?
Well,
I'm not.
You've got senators who want to repeal the 18th Amendment that gave the direct election of senators from the states. I mean, what's next? Are they going to go after the 19th Amendment? That gave women the right to vote?
This is not a facetious argument.
I agree.
The law in Texas, that voter ID law, that the name has to match exactly from when you signed up to be on the voter rolls to what is on your voter ID. Guess who that throws out? Women, because women are the ones that changed their names, and they had to go through and prove every name change. So that was not a facetious statement.
Excellent point, Margie. Excellent point.
I am beside myself right now. All I'm glad is, you know what? I'm glad I had cancer when I was 36 and had to have a complete hysterectomy. And I'm almost afraid. I have 2 nieces in their 20s. I am terrified for them.
Yep. I have 2 daughters and a granddaughter. I share your concern. Margie, you said it so well. I have nothing else to add to it. Thank you very much. Thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, so I had a question. I saw something on Twitter regarding the abortion decision being about right to privacy, and they basically were saying that, this would open the door to other rights of privacy issues.
That's correct.
Such as gay marriage, interracial marriage, of which I'm in one.
Yep. And the sodomy laws, and Texas v. Lawrence, or Lawrence v. Texas.
And birth control.
Yes.
And birth control.
Yep, absolutely. Griswold versus Connecticut, yes.
I just want people to understand the can of worms that you're opening up by doing this. Because for the people out there who think that they're not going to be affected, you're going to be affected at some point, because they're not going to stop with abortion.
No, this is not the end. This is the beginning.
And they're not going to stop with abortion. They're going to go after birth control. They're going to go after interracial marriage. Like I said, I'm in one. So I'm in North Carolina. So, presumably if they throw it back to the states and we get the wrong type of people in state legislature and the governor, could my marriage be illegal?
Yep.
And keep in mind, Loving versus Virginia was just 50 years ago, too.
Yep.
I don't even know what to say. I mean, I could go on a rant about, how outraged people should have been in 2016 when Mitch McConnell held open that Supreme Court seat, denying Merrick Garland a hearing. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people they didn't believe that Trump could actually win.
Well, we took our cue from Obama. Obama did not go on a rant about McConnell, and the rest of us thought, okay.
I blame him for that. He should have been raising hell.
I agree.
He should have been raising hell. And, people don't think this kind of stuff can happen. They don't think your rights can be taken away. It's happening now.
Yep.
So I hope people don't wake up until things affect them personally. So that's why I'm throwing it out there that this is not the end. If you think this just affects women or whatever, this isn't, somebody mentioned, hey, for all the guys out there who don't think this is going to affect them, child support payments, are going to kick in, so you're going to be affected by this too in your wallet.
And we have DNA testing now that we didn't have 44 years ago, or what is it? Yeah, 41 years ago. In any case, back in 73. I can't do math in my head, damn it. But, we didn't have DNA testing back then, and so it was a lot harder to prove paternity. And the closest you could get was blood type, and that was, maybe. But now we've got DNA testing, so yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
but again, my point is, this is not just going to affect women. It's going to affect all of us in one way or another, because they're not going to stop.
Yep. Unless
people get out and vote these people out of office.
Yeah, you are seeing the face of right-wing extremism right here,
they want a theocracy.
Right now.
They want a theocracy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm not going to go on another rant that may sound anti-Catholic, other than to say that we had a theocracy for 1,000 years in Europe, where Europe was run by the Catholic Church. And, to some extent, some Catholics are still behaving like, gee, that should be the case. But let's be clear. This is not just Catholics who are driving this. In fact, what has happened since 1980 is that, frankly, the white evangelicals in the United States, who outnumber the Catholics, are driving this train. And they're even crazier than the anti-abortion Catholics. And you're absolutely right. Interracial marriage is up for grabs now. There has never been legislation passed codifying Loving v. Virginia. Birth control is up for grabs. I've already gone through the list. I don't need to repeat it again. But Kevin, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We're kind of processing this today and talking about where it might go, what it might do. At the top of the next hour, we're going to be having a brief conversation with Heather Shumaker, or maybe Shumaker, who is the Director of State Abortion Access, to find out what's going on in the individual states right now relative to this. She's with the National Women's Law Center. And then we'll continue our conversation.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But that said, I'll be back with your calls on the other side of this break. I'm curious to hear from people who think this is a good decision. And welcome back. Let's see here. Free Speech TV. There we go. Juanita in Prosser, Washington. Hey, Juanita, what's on your mind today?
Do people realize that in Israel, abortion is perfectly legal?
In Canada, not only is abortion completely legal at all stages of pregnancy, but it's paid for by the government.
Right.
It's covered by Medicare.
Yeah, but we give a lot of money to Israel and all this kind of stuff, but it's legal.
Yeah, well, let's not use this as an opportunity to trash Israel or Canada or any other country.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not trying to do that. But if people want to follow the religion, wasn't there some Jewish justices on the court?
There are two, and which is Breyer and Kagan, and they are both opposed to this decision.
Oh, okay. Also, these very same people that are running around talking about, they're against abortions, weren't these the same people who were screaming about the vaccine they were against the vaccine and wearing masks?
I don't know.
Because, the government was telling them they had to wear masks.
Yeah, if you drew the Venn diagram of the anti-mask people and the anti-abortion people, there's a massive amount of overlap because they're, by and large, both in the right-wingosphere. Although I know a couple of lefties who have become anti-vax, anti-mask folks, which is just, I'm still trying to understand. But
well, that's what I'm trying to say. They were complaining the government's telling them what they can and cannot do to their bodies, but yet they want to do that to women.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. Juanita, thank you for the call. Charles in Santa Monica, listening on KPFK. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Hey, Justice John Paul Stevens, in a 1992 opinion, referred to the fact that St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, and St. Jerome all held, along with Aristotle, that personhood did not develop until late in pregnancy, and that was church doctrine for 600 years.
Yeah, there was, I believe, up until the 19th century, and I could be wrong on this, but this is my recollection. It's been a while since we did this as a major topic on the show where I did the research. But I believe that up until the 19th century, it was called quickening, which is basically when you can feel the baby kicking. And that's the point at which abortion was frowned upon or outlawed by the Catholic Church. And prior to that, it was acceptable.
Yeah, it was some pope in about 1858, and basically it was political, just the way it is now.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and find it, and perhaps somebody will call and say, "Oh, I know when the Catholic Church changed." A lot happened in the 19th century, in the 1800s. That was also toward the end of the 1800s, in the 1880s, 1890s. That was when what was his name, Mulrooney, name something like that, kind of an odd, kind of semi-Irish sounding name, came up with the whole idea of the rapture. The rapture was never part of Christianity until this guy, invented this whole thing about the end times are coming, and here's, and the rapture, and we're all going to pop up out of the earth, and people are going to vanish, from the restaurant suddenly, and that has been embraced, not by the Catholic Church, but by the Protestants, by the crazed Protestants. And here we are. Charles, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and thanks for pointing that out. Good one. We'll be right back, picking up your phone calls on the issues of the day. And today, there's really just one. I mean, I suppose we could talk about other things, but this is a big deal. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. The recent killing of a young black man in Michigan, Patrick Loyola, who was, the police officer was sitting on his back and put a gun right to the back of his head and shot him, is just the latest example of police killing people out of traffic stops, and predominantly black people. 28% of the people who are killed in traffic stops are black, but African Americans are only 13% of our population. Police in the United States have killed nearly 600 people during traffic stops since 2017. Mapping Police Violence is the nonprofit that's been doing the work on this. About 10% just this year, about 10% of the 1,100 people killed by police this year have been killed at traffic stops. Dante Wright, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, we know their names and we know their stories, but we're not doing enough to get this under control. Other countries tend not to have this problem. We need to do something now. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls as we're kind of processing what's going on here. Rich in Cedro Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hey, a number of red states have trigger laws that will essentially outlaw abortion when Roe is turned over.
That's right, about 20 of them.
Blue states need to initiate trigger laws that will, once the privacy protections of Roe are overturned, we can now initiate deep, intensive physical and psychological background checks for gun ownership. If you own guns, if you're applying to own firearms, we can look into your medical background, your psychological background. If there's any reason at all, we'll confiscate your guns.
I've said for a long time, Rich, that I think buying a gun should be just as hard as getting an abortion. You should have to go to the gun store. You have to come back 3 days later. You have to think about it. There's only one gun store per state. You have to have a physical exam, an invasive physical exam. You know, heck, we could throw in a colonoscopy just for the fun of it, right? And
right. Well, this is goose and gander stuff, too, because it's primarily men who own guns and it's primarily women who have abortions.
Yeah, absolutely. Rich, thank you. Very interesting. Tom in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Tom. Thanks for listening to WRRD. What's up?
Yeah, Tom, first off, we the people are the government, and we can't forget that.
Amen.
And second, I am a proud FDR Democrat. Never thought the day would come where I disagree with you. But maybe we don't disagree completely, but it is the far right-wing conservative Catholics that are the problem.
Oh, I get that. The majority of Catholics actually are supportive of birth control rights and abortion rights, according to most surveys. But the institution of the church is pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into passing anti-abortion laws and getting elected anti-abortion legislators. And they have been doing that throughout my entire lifetime. And that's what I'm calling out. I'm not calling out average Catholics. There's a lot of really wonderful people who are Catholics.
I just want to make sure we're not separating the Catholics because we don't need that.
Yeah, I agree.
But what I wanted to say is that, you know, as an example, I am anti-abortion. I am anti-termination, but I am also pro a woman's right to choose. A woman can choose either to have a child or not to have, or have a child or not have a child. That's her choice. And I'm telling you, if a woman start losing that choice, we're going to be back to men deciding whether they can have checkbooks. We're going to be getting back to whether or not a woman can do different things that they couldn't do. We're heading right to the Handmaid's Tale is where we're heading.
You're absolutely right. We're splitting into handmaid states and free states, and you're right. It was in I believe 1972 that women gained the right to have a credit card or a checking account without the signature of a father or husband or brother.
Right, and we need to frame this thing because the Catholic Church early when I was young took on this right to life and pro-life word, which is total BS. This is either pro a woman's right to choose or pro big government's right to choose.
Right.
And government is basically infringing upon women, not just with reproductive rights, but in every aspect of their life to make them a second-class citizen. And that's what we need to remember here, because there's a lot of people that are just talking about, you know, I'll tell you, the word abortion in the Catholics growing up and the doctrine that it was, that always brought up like a killing of a baby. That's the first thing you think of when you say that word abortion. So the thing is, we need to be talking about women's rights and a woman's right to choose and versus the government's right to choose, because government will choose everything for a woman if they can choose her reproductive rights as well.
I agree, Tom, and I think that's the position probably of most Catholics. I haven't seen recent polling on it, but it certainly was the case about maybe a half a decade ago or so, the last time this was a hot issue and we did it on the show. And I have a friend who's Catholic and who is gung-ho, anti-abortion. And my response to her is, fine, don't get an abortion.
Right. That's exactly what I say. And that's what I am. I mean, I'll tell you what, when we were in the 7th grade, we had to wear those little, fetuses on our jackets and stuff. And we were there to protect the young. So this dogma started a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we need to, just accept the fact, yes, that, it may be that it starts at conception. But you know what? It's still a woman's right. And most women choose not to terminate a pregnancy.
Correct.
Most women do not terminate their pregnancies. And we need to remember that part rather than just that they're terminating pregnancy.
Yeah, I'm with you. Tom, thank you. A good conversation and an important one to have, I think. We're going to find out what the status is on a state-by-state basis with Heather Shumaker from the National Women's Law Center on the other side of this break. It'll be about a 10-minute conversation, then we'll be back to your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones.
By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master slaves, feudalism had lord serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Heather Shumaker, the Director of State Abortion Access for the National Women's Law Center, NWLC.org. Heather's Twitter handle is Heather Dottie, D-O-T-T-I-E, and the organization is at NWLC. Heather, welcome to the program. What is we've kind of thoroughly aired on this program, what's going on in the previous hour, all the details of all this and where it could go and how this is probably a stage-setting move for eliminating gay rights, eliminating sodomy rights, eliminating interracial marriage rights, eliminating birth control rights. All of these things hang on the exact same hook that Alito is using to end abortion rights. But all that said, this is going to, and explicitly says in this decision, toss this to the states. And you're the person in charge of state abortion access. What's going on in the states?
Well, that's quite a setup.
Feel free to comment on any of it. Go for it. It's all yours.
Well, shout out to the folks who are on the ground in the states doing the hard work. I get to sit in D.C. and have the state abortion access in my title, but shout out to those folks who do the hard work every day. They're the reason that, people, despite this leaked opinion, can get their abortions today, can get their abortions tomorrow, and will be fighting day in and day out to ensure that's the case. But you're right. If this leaked opinion does ring true, we will see this all back to the states again, and we know we have some taste of that over the last decade or decades by the way that state legislatures have been chipping away at folks' access. But we will really see a new moment once this decision, if it becomes reality.
Where to begin with this?
I know.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
There is, one of the things that could blow up any effort on the part of states, Connecticut, for example, it passed their House 2 weeks ago, it passed their Senate last Friday. I don't know if Governor Lamont has signed it yet or not, but Connecticut has legislation that makes it the first, essentially, fugitive woman state. And a place where, kind of the opposite of the Fugitive Slave Act, a place where women cannot be pursued and judgments cannot, Texas can't go after $10,000 from a Texas woman who flees to Connecticut. That's great, and other states, other blue states will probably be emulating that. But you've got numerous Republicans in the House and Senate who are saying, okay, now that we've got this, let's pass a nationwide ban on abortion and criminalize abortion all across the United States, which of course blows up Connecticut, blows up the handful of states that have the right to abortion already enshrined in their constitutions. What do we do about this? Where is this at?
There's a lot to unpack there. So, shout out to the Connecticut's and the other states that are doing what they can to ensure that folks have access. The provisions that are moving in Connecticut, which I think you're right, I don't think the governor has yet signed that bill package, but that would create some safe haven for the providers specifically to avoid being pulled back to the state for that feels that they have some sort of tie to prosecuting a provider. In the SB 8 Texas-style law, it specifically carves out the person who had the abortion from civil liability. But, we know that the folks who have abortions and have become pregnant have been prosecuted for their pregnancy outcomes regardless. And we're going to see more of that regardless of what the good efforts that states take. But to your point about a national ban, I guess I'm not quite sure how far they are in that process. I think it's a piece of this long-term plan to end abortion access. But even without that, more than half the states are poised to essentially ban abortion if they are allowed to at the state level. And certainly that's where the action has been for at least the last decade in terms of whether your state makes abortion accessible or not.
This is the 26 Republican-controlled states, essentially, right? Or is my number wrong? Yeah. And so I know a number of them. I thought it was like 13 that had trigger laws already in place, but I saw 20 in the press the other day. But isn't it safe to assume that between now and June or July, when this decision actually gets handed down, and it may be tweaked, but it's unlikely it's going to be substantially changed, isn't it safe to assume that by that time, pretty much every Republican-controlled state in the union will have criminalized abortion, and the excuse that they'll be using will be, well, women can still get abortions. They can always, hop on a plane and go to California.
I mean, if not before we get a decision in this case, I think we could anticipate lawmakers calling for special sessions over the summer. We've seen states do that in the past. Sure. And declare this to be some sort of emergency, which it is an emergency, just in the opposite direction for access to basic health care. I think I'm not totally sure if we'll see folks saying that, you can hop on a plane and go to another state, because I think that goes beyond what their purpose is too, right? Like we've seen states like Missouri trying to put in place laws that would prevent folks from leaving the state to get care, right? Right. Already in Texas, we see that young people in particular have a really hard time leaving the state. People who are undocumented have a really hard time leaving the state, even though theoretically that is possible for some folks.
Yeah, girls under 18 who may not have a driver's license, unless a parent is going to accompany them or somebody's going to accompany them, it's going to be a real challenge. Right. This is nuts. What is happening in the blue? So we've kind of covered here what's going on in the red states. What's happening in the blue states with regard to this?
Yeah, I think a lot of blue states are doing the best that they can to pass the types of laws that will ensure that they can take as many folks as they can that need access to abortion. And so that can be everything from, getting rid of restrictions that are on the books. Thinking about Maryland as an example, up until very recently, they had a law that required that abortions be only provided by physicians, which is medically unnecessary. And they have expanded that to include advanced practice clinicians to be able to provide abortions now, which can greatly expand the scope of who can provide abortions and just setting the stage for the folks that we assume will go to Maryland for their procedures. And then states like California, they came out with a whole host of ideas of how they could improve access, including a fund for folks seeking care, coming from out of state to seek care in their state, a website that really helps people navigate the process, things like that. So I would say repealing the restrictions that are on the books and then also doing things to welcome folks who are going to inevitably be coming to their state.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary moment in history. Heather, what advice do you have for, outside of going to nwlc.org, the National Women's Law Center, and signing up and helping out, which I strongly recommend. Outside of that, what action steps should people of goodwill or people who are concerned about the rights of women and frankly, this larger frame, that this is probably just the beginning of a larger attack on a whole spectrum of rights for basically non-racial minorities. What can people do? Seems to me like voting is at the top of that list, right?
I mean, it feels pretty hopeless right now, but I think there are actually a lot of things that folks can do. Voting would be one of them. We're in this place because extremists are on the court and are in all of our courts and in the legislatures, right? So calling them to let them know what you think of what they're doing. Call your local lawmaker, call your state representative, call them and tell them what you want them to be focused on. Show up to the actions that are starting to happen already. Folks are rallied in front of the Supreme Court right now. There is a big rally starting at 5 p.m. There are similar rallies across the nation at federal courthouses and local courthouses. Show up and be there and don't allow this moment to happen quietly. It might feel hopeless, but I think that we need to be a strong opposing voice to this time. Yeah.
Whoop. I'm sorry, Heather. I just hit the wrong button, and let me get you back here. My apologies. I accidentally leaned on the button there and cut you off. So,
no worries.
So basically get out there, get active, get political. This is a political problem that's going to be solved through politics.
Yes, but I think also destigmatize abortion. It's hard to take advantage of something that's not shameful to folks.
There you go. So tell your stories or just acknowledge the reality of this horrible moment and the difficult choices that are associated with abortion, and that those choices should be a woman's choice, not anybody else's. Heather, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 16 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls on the other side of this break. What do we do about this? How do we best strategize this? How do we best message it? And welcome back. And let's see here, Free Speech TV. There we go. Michelle in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I appreciate you taking my call. I want to say that having an abortion is the moral choice more often than not. And I had 2 abortions. I'm 66 years old. When it was legalized in 1973, I think it was probably in 1975, I had my first abortion, and I had I decided that, you know, who was I at 18 or 19 years old? I was adrift in the world. It was a different time. We didn't have everything at our fingertips, all knowledge and everything. But the reason I decided to have an abortion was because I was not prepared to have a child. And I had no way to take care of myself. I didn't even know how I was going to take care of myself in this world. So later, with the same man who offered to marry me at that time, and I said, thank you very much. I am not going to get pregnant. I mean, I'm not going to get married because I'm pregnant, and I'm not going to have a child anyway. So later, I was very sick, and I was pregnant again. We were married at this time, and I had an abortion because I was on the verge of a coma every single second from hypoglycemia. I wasn't diabetic. I was just malnutritioned. And so we got married. We were married 5 years. And both times I had the abortion, I did not suffer. I did not struggle. It was not something that I agonized over. It was a simple fact of life. And so 5 years later in our marriage, I became pregnant again. And at that time, in short, I made the choice to proceed because I felt like I had a track record with this man, and he was so happy. Well, so the first 2 times I had an abortion, I told those souls both times, I am not ready for you. Come back later. And when I made the choice to go through with a pregnancy, I ended up having twins. So I illustrate this because, yes.
So you've got a personal theology around this.
Yes, I do.
It's very charming.
Not only that, if people ask me if I'm a Christian, I don't wear that banner. I follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, who gave us free choice and free will and brains. And you know, I'm now raising the grandchildren of my husband, 2 granddaughters who are 7 and 5, because I told his children when his child and the woman that he was with to have an abortion when they were pregnant. And that was immoral. How could I? Blah, 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 blah. And so they were not fit to have children. They couldn't take care of themselves. They were recovering drug addicts. And there's an entire generation, like my generation, who are raising their grandchildren, Tom, because people go, oh, it's immoral to have an abortion. No, the moral choice is not to have children that you are not going to take care of, that you are going to neglect, and that you cannot take care of yourself. So these 2 children grew up in a one-room apartment, darked out windows, didn't know day from night when we got them delivered to our house, and are meth children.
Oh my! It's a tough one.
So
Michelle, Michelle, we're out of time.
I know.
I'm sorry.
Hear your music. I got to let you go. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. It was a marvelous story. Thank you. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Have you noticed that people are basically imitating Donald Trump all over the country? We're seeing all this rude behavior, sexist, racist behavior, people getting arrested at airport gates, airplanes being turned around because people are fighting with flight attendants, disorderly, rude, unhinged conduct. I mean, it's just gone nuts. Car crashes are up, gun deaths are up, shootings are up. Healthcare workers are being literally physically assaulted in some hospitals. They're having to put together panic buttons. This kind of behavior in our schools is increasing. It looks like, according to some sociologists, psychologists, and even business consultants, it looks like a lot of this ties back not just to the Trump presidency, with Donald Trump providing us with an example of how to be, an obnoxious person, but also the crisis of the pandemic. We've got a deeper dive into this topic over at ThomHartmann.com. There's a great video about it. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls. Jim in Nevada, California. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Thanks, Don, for taking this. My thing is that I'm trying to debunk a lot of stuff. And you know how when we go to war, it's really about the profits for the war industry, but you just have to have a cause you can get support for. The stuff that seems to be coming out of the Republican side is all about power and money, not about governing for a nation of people. And I'm kind of thinking that a lot of these new laws, especially banning abortion, it's one of the trigger points that divide us. They found out that there's two sides that you can keep going. So that makes very rich people have an easier control over the masses of people. And with the idea of outlawing abortion, it opens up the door for the prison industry to grow more. If you start, whenever you want more prisons, you have to make more laws that will incarcerate more.
I'm not quite as cynical as you are, Jim, in this regard. I don't think people are sitting around going, let's have more prisoners, or that the prison industry is pushing this. They're quite happy to push the drug laws, which is probably why marijuana is still a Schedule I drug. But that said, I do think that this is. This is a power grab, essentially, by Republicans. It is a way to put women back in the box, and I think it's just the beginning. I think they're going to go after gays next. I think they're going to, or gay marriage specifically. I think they're going to go after the anti-sodomy decision, Lawrence v. Texas. I just see a lot of stuff coming down the road as a consequence of this. Jim, thank you for the call. Darlene in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Darlene, what's up?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I really appreciate it. I was telling your screener my story, as it were, so I will just repeat to you what I told her.
Okay.
Throughout the years, me and many girlfriends get together. They are from all over the country. One particular year, about 10 years ago, we had, gotten together, and after a couple of bottles of wine and a really good joint, we decided that we could solve this abortion thing. And our decision was, as if we were the Supreme Court, to mandate that all boy children between the ages of 10 and 12 get a vasectomy, which I might add is reversible.
That's correct. Just in the last 20 years or so, the reversibility has gone from being difficult to being fairly straightforward.
Yeah. So we decided that at that time that all young men should have a vasectomy. And when they found the love of their life, when they found the woman they wanted to have a family with, that they could reverse the procedure very quickly when they proved they could raise a family. When they proved they could raise a family with a mother that stayed at home if she so choose. And, and to get them through to college. And because babies take money, and plenty of it. And believe me, as a single mother, raising a child and having been basically deserted, abandoned, I thought it was a pretty good choice at the time.
I think it's brilliant.
Let's think about that.
I think it's brilliant. If nothing else, as political theater, introducing legislation to do that would be brilliant.
Oh, yeah, well, state's got a trigger. We got a trigger, too. I say no sex until that gets passed.
There you go. Darlene, thank you. Thank you for the call. Your friends and yourself came up with a great one.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your thoughts on all this. We'll pick up your calls right on the other side of this break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan coworker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age.
Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation and Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
Amazing story out of New Hampshire. The state legislature, this was after in Virginia, the new governor, Glenn Youngkin, who ran as a, I'm not Donald Trump, and then immediately put up a tip line for parents to turn in their, for parents to report their kids' teachers if they say something subversive. Now in New Hampshire, they've got a law that prohibits the dissemination of certain divisive concepts related to sex and race. Those divisive concepts being that people could be unconsciously racist. A conservative moms group has put up a $500 bounty in New Hampshire for the first person who could destroy the reputation and career of a teacher using this new law. So the teachers union sued the state of New Hampshire, and now the Republicans in New Hampshire, who control the state, are fighting back by putting up a new law that is going to require teachers to take a loyalty oath and ban any, quote, any negative account or representation of the founding and history of the U.S. It's nuts. There's a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. A lot to talk about here. And so much. The larger issues of the Supreme Court, as well as what's next after abortion. But let's focus on abortion for the moment. Although you're free to discuss any of these things, there's a huge context. Cheryl in Studio City, California. Hey, Cheryl, what's on your mind?
Yes, thank you, Tom. So many fires, so little water.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I like your idea of colonic or something for people seeking guns. If they can poke around at our nether regions for no apparent reason, then let's have a little poke at them.
Right.
But the reason I called is I called you the other day about this, and I'm still confused. This whole thing about voting, yeah, it's a great idea. It was a great idea until red states started making it impossible for blue votes to count. So I don't think that's an option in this particular thing because, and you have to, I'm not sure that you do understand or don't want to understand because I know you're very rose-colored glasses, as I used to be. But it is how people like me that will go out and march and make phone calls and so forth. This is why there is disillusion. It's like, what are you talking about? Get people register to vote for what reason? So they can go blue vote out, red vote in. It's not the best solution. However, the reason I called you really is because what I think it was on your show. It was one of the shows on Sirius that was talking about the updating of the Supreme Court in the United States, and there is a number associated with the population of the country that would allow for X amount of Supreme Court judges. Would you know what that number is?
You're thinking about members of the House of Representatives. When the Constitution was first written, I think it was like 34,000 people or something like that. That number ultimately got thrown out. Essentially, it's supposed to be 100 and some odd thousand. There is no number for the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court started out.
I thought there was some sort of representation about, because it does have a fluctuating number.
It does, and it's entirely up to Congress. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution says that the Congress shall regulate the Supreme Court. And the regulation of the court includes the number of people on the court. For example, when the court started, there were 6 people. When John Adams lost the election of 1800 to Thomas Jefferson, in the lame duck session, Adams and his Federalists cut the court down to 5 because there was an opening on the court at that time, so that Jefferson couldn't fill that opening. When Jefferson came in, he came in a sweep along with the Democratic Republicans, today's Democratic Party. And so they raised it back up to 6, as I recall. Don't count me on these numbers. The numbers are in my article. I'm doing this from memory, and my memory isn't always 100% accurate. But they raised it back up by 1. Then when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and Andrew Johnson became president, at that time, because Johnson was a slave-holding Democrat, and the Republicans controlled the House and Senate, and there was an open seat on the Supreme Court again at that moment. They did not want Johnson to be able to fill that seat. And, well, actually, there wasn't a seat on the court. They were afraid that there would become one on the seat. So what they did was they officially reduced the size of the court by 1. And then when Ulysses Grant came in, he expanded the court back up. He was the president who followed Johnson, along with the Republican majority. And then in 1937, Franklin Roosevelt threatened to take the court, increase it substantially with a scheme that would, at that point in time, 5 of the 9 members were over 70 years old. And so Franklin Roosevelt's proposal was, we'll take all 5 of those guys, we're not going to kick them off the court, we're going to call them justices emeritus, and collectively they will have 1 vote that they can vote by majority rule, and then we'll fill the court with another 4 people to bring it back up to 9 official justices, plus these 4 ancillary justices. So he was going to take the court to 13. He ended up not having to do that because Justice Owen Roberts decided to change his vote and start voting with FDR instead of with the 4 horsemen, and thus the New Deal was saved. But that probably would pass. I know conventional wisdom these days and Wikipedia and everything say, oh, FDR was going to lose his court packing scheme. When you read histories of the time and you go back and read the papers, and I document this at painful length in my book, The Supreme Court, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, it almost certainly would have passed. And frankly, I think that you can call it court packing, you can call it expanding the court, you can call it rebalancing the court, whatever you want to call it. The Republicans are going to call it court packing, so let's just get ahead of it right now and call it that. Packing the court, increasing the size of the court, undoing Mitch McConnell's packing of the court, unpacking the court, whatever you want to call it. I think that needs to be at the top of our agenda, because I'm telling you, if we pass a law saying, oh yeah, no, abortion is legal, as soon as you get Republicans controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, they will pass a law reversing that law. And this is why conservatives, since the 1950s, have been busting their chops to get right-wing judges on the Supreme Court and in all the federal courts, because they realize that the courts are actually more powerful than the legislature.
So apart from being afraid of being called partisan.
Cheryl, your phone has just gone totally nuts, and I can't hear what you're saying. I don't know if there's something you can do to fix that. If not,
can you hear me now?
Yeah, no, I can't. I'm sorry. It's badly distorted. We'll continue the conversation another time. Michelle in Denver. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I was molested at the age of 12. So what you're literally saying is these children will have to carry a child to term at a young age.
That's correct. And for a 12-year-old to give birth is to place her life in danger, seriously.
Right, and to be responsible for it. It messed me up for decades.
Yeah.
And to do this to children who don't deserve it. It messed me up for decades, and you want to compound that with forcing them to have a child.
Yep.
And you're okay with this.
This is the Republican position. It's official. Donald Trump is proud of it, as are all these other Republicans. They're bragging about it. Josh Hawley this morning was issuing press releases about this is absolutely wonderful. They're all bent out of shape that a news release, that Politico publicized this, but they're bent out of shape, I think, because they just wanted it to be a fait accompli. But yeah, Michelle, absolutely.
And to do this is absolutely appalling. And it was on the rise. It was coming. And I've said over and over again, democracy is not free. You have to continually fight for it.
Yep.
You have to pay attention. And now we're here, and people are up in arms when they could have just given the Democrats the Senate. They could have given Obama full power. But they didn't. And to blame Obama, who was pinned as either an angry black man and was told he wasn't going to be able to get anything done for the American people because of obstruction, is wrong.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We should have helped him.
Yeah, and this is, but at the end of the day, this is not about Obama. And frankly, I am very upset that Manchin and Sinema weren't willing to set aside the filibuster for voting rights and for Build Back Better. This may be the thing that will push them. I don't know. We'll see. But the politics here are going to get very, very interesting. It's also going to have a huge impact, I believe, on the 2022 and 2024 elections. And it's going to be real interesting to see if Republicans, given that 56% of Republicans and 78% of Democrats believe that a woman should have the right to choose an abortion, if those numbers hold, and I'm guessing that those numbers are actually going to grow now that this is a reality right in front of our faces, if those hold, it's going to be real interesting to see if Republicans hold to this position or if they start backing away. We'll see. Michelle, thank you for the call.
And that's my point, is you want to praise the young people who still don't show up?
No, I want to encourage them to show up.
To decide their future?
Yeah, this
and
hopefully
leave it up to the few who have been fighting for generations for change. Right. You thought it was going to be instant. It isn't.
There you go.
So understand your future is at jeopardy.
Yep. Amen.
Your future literally is in jeopardy right now.
Amen.
So you better get going with registering all your friends and not make it about a popular social hour. Because we've got to get these Republicans out. The rule of law is totally in jeopardy now. Yeah. And they be as corrupt as they want to be on top of doing what they're doing now.
Yeah. Amen. Michelle, thank you. Very well said. And thank you for sharing what I'm sure was a very difficult story with our audience. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truths the right-wing Republicans would rather you didn't know.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls on the other side of this break. Stick around. And welcome back. Karen from Muskogee, Oklahoma. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Nice to talk to you. I have a question for you on today's topic. What if a woman got pregnant, was thrilled to death about it, and 3 months, and she told everybody she was pregnant, and 3 months later she has a miscarriage? What's going to happen to her? Is she going to have to hire an attorney? Is she going to have to be prosecuted? It scares me because I was in that situation one time. I was pregnant with 2 sets of twins and wasn't doing real well with it. And I lost the first set at 3 months. And when I went into the hospital, the doctor asked me if I had done anything. Now, this was 37 years ago. And a month later, I lost the last set of twins. First time pregnant for our babies. So if back then they were asking me questions about why I lost those babies, I was just astounded. I could not believe that they would think I would do something like that.
Yeah.
I'm a pro-choice. I personally, I would not have an abortion, but I don't want to rule someone else's thoughts and their thinking. And if a woman wants an abortion, she's got a good reason. You don't do that lightly.
Yep, I agree.
And I'd just like to hear what you think would happen. I mean, they're starting in already.
Mike Pence, when he was governor of Indiana back in around it was the first decade of this millennia. When he was governor of Indiana, he was proposing legislation that would have required women who have miscarriages to save that miscarriage and give it a proper funeral. And the result of this was that if you're gonna track miscarriages, and by the way, Karen, I have a somewhat personal understanding of what you went through. Louise was pregnant 4 times. We have 3 children. We had a miscarriage too, and it was devastating. But anyhow, that said. So what happened was women across Indiana got together. They first organized it on Facebook, this thing called Periods for Pence, where they said, we'll save you the trouble of building a statewide database to track every single woman's period. We'll notify you. And so all these women are coming in saying, hey, my period just started. I'm good for another 30 days, Mike. And, it was very, very funny. All around the country, people were laughing at Mike Pence about it. It's not funny anymore.
It's not funny. It is not funny, and I don't put anything past them. And this thing about them probably in the future getting rid of the birth control. With the birth control, are they gonna take away condoms from men too? Well, they did. It was in 1965. It was illegal for a married couple to have a condom in their bedroom in Connecticut. Well, guess what? They'll do it again.
I agree.
And if they want to quote Bible, they can look in the Bible and where the Bible says to men, do not spill your seed on the ground.
There you go. Let's start prosecuting masturbation. It's right there in Deuteronomy. Karen, thank you very much. I'm laughing. I shouldn't be laughing. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. So how do you know which party has the most crooks in it? The Republicans are always saying, oh, those Democrats, they're soft on crime and, a lot of murders in Democrat-run cities. Well, for the record, first off, red states and red counties have a higher per capita murder rates than do blue states and blue counties. It's just a fact. But secondly, let's look at some of the administrations. I mean, the Obama administration had no criminal indictments. The Jimmy Carter administration had 1. The Bill Clinton administration had 2. But what about the Republican administrations? It was 16 for George W. Bush. It was 26 criminal indictments for Ronald Reagan. Richard Nixon's administration had 76 criminal indictments. And of course, the full-time professional rapist and grifter, Donald Trump, he had 215 criminal indictments. So who's really soft on crime? We got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour, and Dan in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
You remember when you were in high school and they told you that we had the separation of powers amongst the House, the administration, and the courts and everything like that?
Yeah, for me, that was elementary school. I remember it. It was 4th and 5th grade.
That's a lie. That's an absolute and total lie. John Marshall was another one of those. I hesitate to call them Nazis, but he was a Federalist. At any rate, after Marbury actually lost his case, this whole thing does not hinge on Marbury versus Madison. It hinges on a sidebar that he had decided that he was going to say, we should have judicial review of all of this. Well, actually, what that does, and it's obvious right now, that you can pack the court all you want, and you can have them be the kings.
They are the kings. They're the kings and queens of America.
Marbury versus Madison was a wrong decision. I've spoken to other lawyers, and they agree.
I wrote an entire book about this, Dan, about how Marbury was wrongly decided. It's called The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. It all started with Marbury.
I've got that on my bookcase. So.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not the only one. I mean, the dean of the Stanford Law School wrote a book called The People Themselves back in the day when Thomas Jefferson was president and was screaming about Marbury, about the Marbury case. Of course, it happened in the third year of his presidency in 1803. A friend of his, Dr. Benjamin Rush, wrote him a letter saying, well, Thomas, if the Supreme Court isn't the final say in what the law of the land is, who is? And Jefferson's answer was the people themselves. They will make mistakes. They will pass stupid laws, but in time they will correct their own errors. We have to trust in the people. We should not have an unelected royalty in the United States. And I completely agree with Jefferson. Yeah, we do, and we have since 1803. Although what's interesting is Jefferson's blowback against that Marbury case was so violent, or so, I mean, it wasn't physically violent, but he was so outspoken, as were so many of the newspapers of the day, that John Marshall never again, in a consequential case of any sort, asserted judicial review, never again tried to strike down a law or write a new law. And in fact, the next time that the Supreme Court did that was in 1856 in Dred Scott, which was another brilliant decision, right? And that was Roger Taney, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he thought he would settle the slavery problem once and for all by simply declaring that all black people in America were the property of whoever white person wanted to claim them, even if they were free people in the North. And of course, Abraham Lincoln, came into office. That was 57. Abraham Lincoln became president in 1861, But Lincoln came out and said, I'm not going to abide by that. This is not going to stand. And so there were only really two major cases that involved judicial review in the entire first 70 years of the existence of the United States. And now every single case that the Supreme Court, or pretty much every single case that the Supreme Court decides, is based on judicial review, where they are either striking down a law or they are creating law from whole cloth. And neither one of those things are envisioned anywhere in the Constitution.
Right.
These are powers that the Supreme Court took onto itself. So, yeah, I am with you, Dan. Thank you very much for the call. Michael in Bangor, Maine. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Tumultuous day. I get it. What you just said with that caller, and as you know, I come from a very strict conservative point of view. I was going to say the exact same thing. So it's kind of I don't know. It's interesting that we agree.
Michael, isn't the traditional conservative position that power should flow from the bottom up, not the top down?
Yes.
It's just that the modern conservative movement has been co-opted by a bunch of neo-Nazis, it seems. No offense.
But I'm not one of them.
I know. That's why I said no offense.
Well, none taken. You can't offend me. But the point is that there is something that can come out of this decision which would be good.
Great. Let's get to it. We have only 1 minute left before the end of the hour, Michael. So it's yours.
I'll do it very quickly. The fact is that the Constitution does not have any mechanism in it for unenumerated rights that aren't in the Constitution. And in fact, the 10th Amendment leaves it to the states to create unenumerated rights. I think you would agree with that.
Yes.
So therefore, just like we did with suffrage, just like we did with emancipation, and it seems like Gallup is correct, that so many people believe in some form of either restricted abortion or some form of abortion, then convene a constitutional convention and put it in the Constitution and deal in an omnibus way with all types of things like contraceptives. Just say the states cannot legislate in procreation.
Right.
It can be done.
I agree with you, Michael. I would not want to do a constitutional convention right now because tinkering with the operating system is pretty dangerous. But a constitutional amendment, which requires the same, 2/3 and 3/4 threshold, that would satisfy me. Does that work for you?
Absolutely. That's the Constitution.
The great minds have a meeting. Michael, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmanReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So back in the summer of 2016, Mike Pence was the governor of Indiana. This was, he was running for vice president, and but he was the governor of Indiana. And of all the strange things to happen, he signed a law. This was called in Indiana. It was called House Enrolled Act 1337, an act to amend the Indiana Code concerning health that required that all abortions and miscarriages have a funeral. Not making this up. It got struck down by the courts. But it required that all abortions and miscarriages, and for a while, the hospitals anyway, and abortion clinics were having to comply with it. And it required them to have a funeral. It made abortions very, very expensive because, you know, you've got a little bit of blood and tissue here, and now we've got to take it to a funeral director and organize a funeral or a cremation at the very least. It required cremation or a funeral. And this then caused women across Indiana, the question was, of course, given particularly that between 20 and 50% of all, I've seen numbers as high as 50%. I think the generally accepted numbers around 20% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. That you know, how are you going to know? How are you going to know when women have miscarriages? Because most miscarriages, the vast majority of them, are at home, and they're in the first month or two. And in fact, there are scientists who suggest that as many as half of all pregnancies or half of all fertilized eggs never implant, you know, which is and just become the next menstrual period, which could arguably become a miscarriage as well. So how do you know? And so there was this talk about how's Mike Pence going to enforce this here in Indiana, you know, before the courts stopped the law. And there was talk about creating a registry, a statewide registry, where women would check in every month and say, okay, my period was on April 5th, so don't hassle me until May 5th, and I'll tell you if my period comes again on May 5th. And out of that came this movement, Periods for Pence, where women all across the state started, it started on Twitter and Facebook. And they started tweeting or Facebooking to Mike Pence saying, you know, well, my period just started. You can check me off the list for this month. And, you know, it started out as kind of a lighthearted thing, but then, you know, some people took this very seriously. The Federalist, for example, one of the publications of the hard right, funded by right-wing billionaires, ran an article on November 14th, 2016, at the height of Periods for Pence, titled, "Sending Menstrual Blood to Mike Pence is a Stupid Protest That Hurts Women." And then it goes, "It's beyond me why the left fears that a man who very obviously loves lots of sex with lots of women wants to ban the birth control and make such quack, 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 right? Let's put some spin on this. This is unfair and it's not right." And some woman actually sent apparently a tampon or a pad to Mike Pence's office, and it just created, oh my God, it's bio-waste, it's coming to us. And the conservatives were just furious. Furious, I'm telling you. But generally speaking, NPR did a whole special on it in November of 2016. And generally speaking, it was treated kind of lighthearted, like, you know, Pence isn't really going to do this. Come on. A funeral for a miscarriage? But it did make it to law. It passed the House and Senate and got signed by the governor. What's next? Now that the clock is turning back to 1950. When I was born, abortion was very illegal. On the other hand, any woman who had the money, and that's always the key, right? Any woman who had the money could go to a doctor and say, I'm having terrible menstrual cramps, wink, wink, and I think I need to have a D&C. I need to have my uterus opened up and scraped out, basically, or vacuumed out, and just get rid of all the tissue that's in there that is causing my cramps. And the doctor would wink, wink, say, okay, fine, I'll refer you to an obstetrician, and the woman would go to the, I know 2 women who did this. Or I knew. I mean, this was 50 years ago. More than 50 years ago. It was when I was in high school. I knew 2 girls who did this, who got abortions when it was illegal. But now they don't, and they used to teach this in medical school. Now, by and large, they don't even teach it in medical school any longer. And now this whole movement has gotten very, very serious about this. And so now, instead of having, health insurance, because health insurance would pay for it back in the day, a DNC, no big deal. It's a procedure. It's not that expensive. But that's no longer the case anymore. And so now, instead of a woman going to her doctor and saying, I need a DNC because I'm having pain or bloating or whatever, now it's going to be, I need to go to Canada or Mexico, the two countries that share a border with the United States, where abortion is fully legal in both countries. In fact, in Canada, abortion is legal at all stages of pregnancy. It's entirely between the woman and her doctor. Well, it's ultimately entirely up to the woman. And in Canada, Canadian Medicare, they have Medicare for all. Every single person in Canada has Medicare, regardless of their age. And Medicare pays for it. No questions asked. 100% paid for. Which raises an interesting question. Are the Canadians and the Mexicans going to start building walls to keep out American women? I mean, it's like, where does this all go? Now, again, I realize I'm engaging in a little bit of hyperbole here to make my point. But it wasn't hyperbole when Mike Pence wanted to track every woman in Indiana and make sure that any miscarriage was turned into a funeral. That was deadly serious. And I don't think it's hyperbole, and I don't think anybody has called specifically about this. But, when I came in this morning, we were talking about this, and Nate said, this is, because Sean and I were talking about, they're going to overturn Obergefell, the gay marriage law, or the gay marriage Supreme Court ruling. And, and birth control might be next. And Nate's comment was, hey, what about Lawrence v. Texas? I mean, their comment, Nate's comment was, that decriminalized gay men having sex. Is that next? Well, of course that's next. That was another example of the Supreme Court essentially making law, which is, according to the Constitution, the job of Congress. And that's the rationale of this decision written by Sam Alito. I mean, some of these guys are so extreme. For example, Neil Gorsuch believes, whose mother, ran the Environmental Protection Agency under Ronald Reagan, and ran it into the ground so badly after 3 years on the job, she had to resign in disgrace. Ann Gorsuch was a disaster for this country. And I don't think very many people disagree with me on that. And so her son, who is now in the Supreme Court, is saying, the EPA is regulating arsenic. In the regulation that said that the EPA could regulate toxic substances, they did not specify arsenic. So the EPA cannot regulate arsenic. The EPA is regulating carbon dioxide. The EPA is trying to, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he's basically saying that unless Congress specifically tells a regulatory agency exactly what they may and may not regulate, it can't be regulated, which would end basically all the functions of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. It would kill them all, which is, of course, the late David Koch's wet dream. I mean, this is what he wanted. He campaigned for president in 1980, running for president on ending all the regulatory agencies because the Constitution doesn't give him that kind of power. We want a libertarian country. I'm telling you, this is not the end. This is the beginning. There's a lot of Sturm und Drang right now in the media, and appropriately so, about this is the end of abortion rights in the United States. But I'm telling you, this is also going to be very shortly. Particularly if you end up with Republicans controlling the House of Representatives, Republicans controlling the Senate, and in 2024, a Republican controlling the White House. We will be doing what Vladimir Putin did in Russia and what Viktor Orban did in Hungary. Everything's going to be on the table. Gay rights will be on the table. LGBTQ rights, excuse me. Gay marriage will be on the table. Birth control will be on the table. Interracial marriage will be on the table. These are all decisions that were made by the Supreme Court in the absence of federal legislation. And that's the MacGuffin, that's the hook, that's the fulcrum, the pivot point on which Alito's decision teeter-totters, on which it stands, is that it's not in the Constitution and it was not made into a law, and therefore we're going to leave it up to the states. It's an unenumerated right. The 10th Amendment says the states are responsible for those things. And of course, none of that considers the fact that now you've got Republicans talking about, well, let's pass federal laws to ban abortion everywhere, including California.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Where do we go with this? I'll pick up your calls right after this break. It's 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Rodney in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Rodney, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I just think that that mothers should be given a little more slack and kind of value in our society. You could do it by giving them any mother who wants it. You know, I mean, if you make a lot of money, then maybe you don't want to take a government stipend, but just give them a basic income and access to education for as long as they have a dependent child, like till age 18.
Which is essentially what we had done with that $300 child tax credit. And,
right.
And it just died at the hands of Sinema Manchin and every single Republican in the United States Senate.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing you have to do is kind of like frame it as like, well, if you really want to value mothers, then let's value motherhood and childhood and give people who can't provide for themselves, whatever their situation is, to a chance to,
What's so ironic, Rodney, is that these guys are claiming that they are outlawing abortion because they love mothers and they love motherhood, and children are a great blessing. But the moment that child is born, they don't want that child to have access to health care. They don't want Medicaid expanded to all the states. They don't want Medicare for all. They don't want that child to have access to food if its family is poor. They want to kill food stamps. They don't want that child to have access to housing. They think that, what is it, Section 9, I think it's called, whatever the housing supports are in the United States are called. They think that those should be done away with. And, they can live in a tent in the park, I mean, it's literally, they are fetus worshipers.
Yeah, I think this irony has to be pointed out to them, and I think reasonable people will see it as,
I think they get it. I think everybody gets it. But yeah, I'm with you. Rodney, thank you for the call. Michael in Crestline, California. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hi. A while back, I came across a scheme or a plan to make the Supreme Court triple, 27 members, right, and then they would be assigned randomly to cases, so we wouldn't have all this preponderance.
It's one of a number of great suggestions, and it's something that the Senate could do, the House and Senate could do with a simple majority if they just blew up the filibuster.
Yeah, otherwise I think we're done for.
I think you're right. Well, maybe. I mean, we'll see. The conversation that we're going to have on this come November, particularly after the November elections, say the second week of November, is going to be really, really interesting, because either a bunch of people are going to be sitting around going, wow, a Democratic blowout. It was because of that Supreme Court decision. Or it's going to be, well, I guess the Supreme Court criminalizing abortion didn't really have much effect. And I don't know which it's going to be. I don't know if this is going to energize Republicans to turn out in larger numbers. I know it's going to energize a lot of Democrats, but if it raises Democratic turnout by 5%, is it also going to raise Republican turnout by 5%? Or is it going to raise Democratic?
Well, they finally got what they wanted for 50 years. What are they going to do now?
Well, now they're going to go after gay marriage. They're going to go after contraception. They're going to go after interracial marriage. I mean, I think it's pretty, and they're going to go after gay sex. I think it's fairly obvious what's next on their agenda. They're talking about it out loud. Michael, thank you for the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We have not in the United States historically protected people's feelings by law. We protect, people from being victims of actions. You can't be discriminated against in a store or a restaurant or a mortgage or anything else based on your race or your gender or your ethnicity or in many cases your sexual identity or gender identity. But it is not typically we don't put into law, you may not hurt somebody's feelings. But that's exactly what Florida is doing with their so-called woke act, the Stop the Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act, which basically threatens teachers if they cause their white children or any children to, quote, feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish as a result of what's being taught. This is a dangerous precedent. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. "24 minutes past the hour." Okay, welcome back. Colleen in Long Island, New York. Hey, Colleen, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Always good to speak. I have to tell you that your concise and comprehensive delivery is always refreshing and brain draining at the same time. I had to have an abortion when I was 38. I did not expect to get pregnant. The father beat a path to the door as soon as he found out. And then he wanted to have a party after I had the abortion. Needless to say, we have not spoken since. Now, the thing is that they found I had a plethora of fibroids. And this was because I had no health insurance and I had not had a pelvic exam in some time. And it was either have the baby and die during the process or have an abortion and not die. So it really wasn't a choice. I did not want to make that choice, but I was, the doctor basically said, I don't want you to die.
Well, you would not have that choice under this decision in about half the states in the United States.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, at the time I live in New York, I still live in New York, but at the time I lived in New York, and fortunately I did not know I was pregnant for 2 months because I kept having my period. So I was in my third month before I even knew I was pregnant.
Which is not uncommon. It's not common, yeah. but it does happen.
It happens. It's common enough. Yeah, it happens. Now, as an aside, I wanted to mention Mike Pence when he closed the last Planned Parenthood clinic in Indiana. That was the last place that people could get HIV testing I want to say financially,
free HIV testing. Yes.
Right. And because he closed that clinic, the largest HIV explosion in Indiana was when he was governor.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And Colleen, I had forgotten about that. Thank you for reminding me. The very bizarre.
It's a shame. It's a shame. It's a shame what they do to women. It's a shame. And we are people too.
Yeah, and women, LGBTQ folks. I mean, this is coming for a whole lot of us. And of course, men are parts of families too. Colleen, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls as we roll into the final half hour of today's program, right on the other side of this break. Today, we're reading about Thunderdome politics, an uncivil war taking back our democracy in an age of Trumpian disinformation and Thunderdome politics by Greg Sargent, the Washington Post columnist. This is from his chapter on voter suppression. It's page 37. Republicans and Democrats inhabit different political realities, as mentioned in a previous chapter. But there are certain facts about our politics that are just objectively true. One of them is this. Generally speaking, efforts to make it harder to vote are almost always pushed by Republicans. You cannot understand what is happening in American politics right now without recognizing this stark and very fundamental difference between the two major political parties. During this decade, procedural hurdles were put into place in around 20 states that in some manner or other have made it harder to vote or to register to vote, or have undone previous efforts to make voting or registering easier, or have otherwise threatened serious disenfranchisement. Most of them were the creation of Republican lawmakers and officials. The difference in the two parties' national platforms for 2016 tells the story. The GOP platform champions additional hurdles that are absurdly disproportionate to the phantom abuse it alleges, while the Democratic platform champions multiple specific ways to make it easier to vote, not harder. The most common and controversial of methods used by Republicans to suppress Democratic turnout is the requirement that would-be voters present identification at the polls. The game here tends to turn on requiring forms of ID that some groups are less likely to have, making participation harder for them. Other restrictions include techniques like cutting back on early voting and making it harder to register, both of which have, in recent years, been instituted in multiple states. Republicans who have passed laws making it harder to vote have tended to claim such measures are necessary to protect against, quote, voter fraud. We'll look at this in more detail below, but for now, note that most of the states that have passed such measures did so while under Republican control. As New York University political scientist Samuel Isikoff has memorably put it, the single predictor necessary to determine whether a state will impose voter access restrictions is whether Republicans control the ballot access process. Scholars trace the modern era of warfare over election rules to the intensely contested presidential election of 2000. In which a divided Supreme Court halted the recount in Florida, throwing the presidency to George W. Bush. The closeness and partisan acrimony of that contest, combined with the intense national focus on election rules that accompanied the court battle over it, helped persuade both parties to invest much more attention and energy on those rules. As a result, both the implementation of measures restricting the ballot and the legal battles over them have intensified in recent years. A brief glance at the surprising history of voter ID laws begins to tell the story of this tightening. In the 1970s, several states implemented voter ID measures, but all of them provided for ways that voters without the proper ID could cast a ballot. By 2000, there were 14 such laws, and they had been implemented by politicians in both parties. But by the mid-2000s, amid rising post-2000 acrimony, a handful of red states began implementing voter ID laws that the nonpartisan National Conference of State Legislatures described as, quote, strict, meaning that they make it easy to disqualify those who don't pass muster. After one of those laws in Indiana was challenged and then upheld in 2008 by the Supreme Court, an escalation began that gained momentum in the Obama era.
From 2010 onward, the adoption of voter ID laws in general, and of strict ones in particular, accelerated. Though a handful were blocked in the courts, as of this writing, a total of 34 states have voter ID laws in effect, 24 that are deemed non-strict, and 10 that are deemed strict. The strict ones are in red states or in swing states where they were implemented by Republicans. The story is very similar if you evaluate the state's voting rules in a broader way, by including not just voter ID measures, but also cutbacks to early voting and restrictions on registration. Here the trend is just as pronounced. After the 2010 elections, the Brennan Center for Justice documented a sharp rise in efforts to pass such measures in the state legislatures across the country. Not all these efforts bore fruit, but many did. By the time voting took place in Election Day 2016, some 14 states had these new restrictions in place for the first time in a presidential election. Now, as of this writing, by the Brennan Center's count, some 20 states have successfully implemented either strict voting ID requirements or cutbacks to early voting or restrictions on registration or other measures with meaningful disenfranchising effects. If you're a liberal who's frustrated by the seemingly unbreakable Republican dominance of national politics, not to mention GOP control of most state governments across the country, then the chances are that these restrictions figure heavily into your explanation of this GOP supremacy. Indeed, social media has been absolutely saturated in recent years with variations of the lament that Republican political dominance is largely maintained through a combination of nefarious and undemocratic tactics, such as ballot restrictions that keep constituencies unfriendly to the GOP from voting, and extreme gerrymanders that have, in effect, built a fortress around the GOP's majority in the House of Representatives. Democrats frequently invoke the GOP's use of these tactics, often justifiably, to raise money and to galvanize turnout. This narrative contains some important truths. Some of the forms that these restrictions on voting access have taken in recent years are diabolically obvious in their efforts to keep constituencies supportive of Democrats from voting. Still others boast the distinction of being more insidiously designed and thus less obvious in their intentions. The book is An Uncivil War by Greg Sargent of The Washington Post.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. The New York Times has put together just an amazing
Angie's
graphic,
list is now Angie.
They took all the record temperatures. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, and Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Oh, well, what's not? Just to clean things up, I agree with everything. Your last rant about everything's on the table, so I don't have to restate all that. It is. Everything that we could possibly, hyperbolate about, that,
right?
Because it's already happening.
Including our regulatory agencies.
Everything, because this court has determined that it's legitimate for them to act as a political body, and in the interest of the political winners that appointed them.
Well, actually, Paul, it's the opposite of that. This court is convinced that it is their duty to strip politics out of previous court decisions. And so all these previous court decisions where the court essentially made law, like Roe v. Wade, or Texas v. Lawrence, Lawrence v. Texas, or Ogre. Can you please say it for me? The gay marriage case?
Obergefell.
Obergefell, thank you. If I can hear somebody say it, I can pronounce it correctly. All those things were actually politicized courts making politicized law, and we're just going to take the court back to neutral. That's the argument that they make.
I know that's what they make, but all courts make law. It's part of the blend that we have of common law and textualism. That's just the way it is.
I agree.
Because you cannot run a society, or you cannot run a judicial system based on textualism alone, because it ends up making no sense. It's
correct.
Because not all statutes apply to every situation. So you have to have some common law input, which is common law is judges making law.
Right. So what's the and Paul? I got a bunch of calls here I want to get to. What's the point that you wanted to make?
Well, okay. So I was going to say that the paradoxical statistic that I'm hearing is not so paradoxical. Is that they keep saying, 26 states have trigger laws. Yet, curiously, 69% of Americans support a woman's right to choose. But that's not paradoxical. See, that's about right. What that tells you is that 26 states account for about 31% of the population. Okay, so in other words, that's your Republican Senate, 31% in 26 states. Because states are states, no matter how many people are, they got more cows or whatever than people. They're still states with 2 senators, and they count for these. They can make these laws. So 69% of people, are in fewer states, but they're more populated, and that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's what I'm telling you. We finally have to take it. We have to. What the court is going to play states' rights when it suits them, and this court's going to play. I
totally get it, and I completely agree. California has 10% of the country's population and 4% of its representation in the Senate. Spot on, Paul. Amen. Thank you. Linda in Chicago. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. My daughter was in her own home. She was hit on the head with a hammer. She was strangled. She was raped. The attacker decided to burn their house down. He beat her up. She got the strength to get outside. She ran to a neighbor, partially clothed, and they took her to the hospital. In the ambulance, she told everybody who her attacker was. And when she made it to the hospital, she told everybody who it was, because she wanted justice for what was done. They put her in a coma, and she was in a coma for a few days. And when she got out of her coma, the first thing she wanted to know was, because she had gone off the birth control and her partner wanted to have a child, she wanted to know if she was pregnant. And being a Catholic hospital, I had pleaded that they give her a morning after pill. They wouldn't do that. And what happened was that when she came out of the coma, she went nuts. She was so afraid that she was pregnant by this maniac that attacked her, who was her future brother-in-law.
Whoa. That's nuts. Well, is the end of the story that she turned out not to be pregnant?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
She didn't.
Well, that's reassuring.
But as a mother, I would have done anything. Yeah. I would have smuggled in a pill, but because it was a Catholic hospital, they would not let her, abort, or just to make sure, that she wasn't going to have a child. But if she would have been pregnant, if people could have just seen how crazy that after all the turmoil and everything that she went through, she wanted to just get this thing out of her body. Right. People don't realize that rape is terrible, and you're going to have more people trying to commit suicide if they don't, especially in rape, if they don't let them have an abortion.
Oh, you had a state legislator in Ohio just last week who said, rape is a great opportunity. You can bring a child into the world. It's great news for rapists all over the country, I'll tell you that. Linda, thank you for sharing this story with me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Tim in Shelby Township, Michigan. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. A quick anecdote. Back in 2004, we were standing in a line at Macomb County College for a John Kerry rally.
Mm-hmm.
Because you wait quite a while. We were talking to 4 women in front of us. We were start talking politics, and then abortion and the Catholic Church came up.
And John Kerry is Catholic, by the way.
Yes. And all 4 of these women derided the Catholic Church and the Archbishop of Detroit at the time, saying that they didn't care about the living, they were destroying the church, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
A little while later, we found that all 4 women were nuns.
Nuns?
Nuns.
Wow.
Sisters.
Wow.
Yes. And also, just the present day, today we're having special elections in the state of Michigan. There's 4 to fill vacant House rep seats.
Right.
We've got one in Shelby Township here. I've been making calls since February for Jim Diaz, and I started about a month and a half ago when I talk to women on the phone or leave messages at women's. I started including that Jim will be a fighter for women's rights because we know what the Republicans are going to do. Great. And that has been warmly accepted by a lot of women.
So if you're in Shelby Township, you want people to vote for Jim Diaz?
Oh, definitely.
Okay,
if they
Tim.
haven't voted yet, get out. We appreciate that, Tom.
Yeah, my pleasure. Day. We got it out in front of a whole bunch of people. Thank you, Tim. James in Baptisttown, New Jersey. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Let me get off speaker. The pro-abortion or pro-life people are always talking about life is formed or conception, viability, heartbeat. I assume that a soul comes in there at some point, whichever one they believe in. So what do they think happens to the soul? Because the biggest terminator of all souls is God.
SOUL, you're talking about. Yeah, this is a theological question, James, and I think it's best left to theology. I have my opinions, but I'm not here to promote. Well, actually, I suppose I am here to promote my opinions, but this is not one that I think is particularly important at this moment in time to share.
Well, I just want, if you knew there was a sort of a general opinion of what they thought about.
Well, there was a time when the church believed, and most religions believed, that the soul entered the body when the body took its first breath. That was called inspiration. Which is where that word comes from. You inhale and the spirit comes in, inspiration. Exactly. And then later on there was this idea that the soul perhaps occupied the body at what was called quickening, the moment that the baby started moving around and kicking and you could feel the motion. Of course, I believe the doctrine of the modern day white evangelicals and Catholics is that the soul is associated with, anyway, at the moment of fertilization or implantation. Frankly, I don't know, and I don't want to be the one to be characterizing Catholic theology because I just don't know it. I didn't grow up Catholic.
Well, yeah, I was they had the limbo thing at one time, which was kind of weird, but anyway, if I could accept Pascal's wager, and I was approached in the room and given Christian theology anyway, but said, here's the deal. I can abort you now, and you can look at the long term, or I can give you a lousy 84 years. You got a chance of pissing that guy off. So which one would you want to take? So,
yeah, Pascal aside, I think we're wandering into fairly deep waters here. Thanks a lot for the call. Liz in Los Angeles. Hey, Liz, what's up?
Hi. I have a little different perspective on this issue, and I'll tell you why. I worked in court for like 30 years. A good portion of that time was spent in the family law section. And we're all our conversations here are about women. What about the men who created these children? I think we should go after these guys for the child support collection. I worked worked sometime in the child support division, and let me tell you, some of these guys have children all over the place.
Yep. And
if they had to pay child support for each and every child, it would be a different situation.
Oh, if we had I'm sorry, go finish your thought.
I think it should be from the date of conception that they have to pay child support. If a woman is responsible from the date of conception, so should the man, and he should be paying child support. And if she had sex with more than one man in a week, then all of them have to pay it. It's put in a trust, and when they're able to determine who the physical father is, then the other men get the money back.
I think you're onto something, Liz. If this was a truly egalitarian society, then the Republicans would not be passing law after law after law after law that only punishes a woman or people who help that woman get an abortion. They would equally be punishing the men who knocked her up, the men who were responsible for that pregnancy. And they would be on the hook for $10,000. But for some reason, these states, these largely male-dominated states, have no interest in going after the men who are causing the pregnancy, to use your phrase, because, obviously, this is not this is about controlling women. Let's just be, Liz, thank you for the call. Let's just be very clear about this. This is about making women into second-class citizens. That's something called misogyny. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'm frankly surprised I haven't had any callers take me to task and say, no, Tom, you're wrong on this. Where are you all? And welcome back. Rick in Cartersville, Georgia. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind?
Tom, in regards to the abortion decision, that I wonder when they say that the right to privacy is not there in the Constitution, then what does that do with the separation of men and women's bathrooms, men and women's dressing rooms, even the peeping Tom laws? Isn't all that based upon the right of privacy?
I think so, Rick. Maybe this can of worms is a whole heck of a lot bigger than we thought.
I would think.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to ask Dan Quayle about that.
Yeah, there you go. That's a fascinating one. Rick, thank you very much for that. Steve in Hampton, Virginia. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, Tom. I appreciate your program and watch you as often as possible. But I just wanted to get to the point real quick. I know you have a lot of callers. But I just wanted to say that I've been watching the news and seeing some of these reporters and talking about about why was this released and the how it was released and so forth, and should it have been released. And my concept of this is that the person that released this, we are living in unprecedented times right now, and our democracy is on the line. Look at Ukraine. Our democracy is on the line. What I'm trying to say here is that the person that did release this in these unprecedented times may have done this country a favor. Because if this had come up in June, we would not have the uproar that we're having now. And you know what? People
You mean because everybody be on vacation?
Well, June would be here. It would have gone through. No one would really have paid attention. People were talking about Roe versus Wade, but not really in the concept right now, like we're doing now.
It also would have been one of a dozen other decisions that the court drops, and it also would have been when Congress is out of session and is scattered across the 50 states. And yeah, all good points, Steve.
So I really did want to say that the person that dropped this, I applaud that person. Remember,
there is a theory that it's a right-winger, you know.
I tend to think so too myself. Remember the book A Warning by Anonymous?
I do.
And who dropped that? It was a person inside Trump Donald's administration.
That's correct.
So this is done, and I think this is. Someone was saying, "What are we talking about?" Look at what everyone is talking about at this point, and I think this is going to be something that's going to help ignite the fire under progressives, under Democrats, and get people to really focus on what we can lose our democracy. Just last point. It's very ironic now to see Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins now saying they're stunned by what the Supreme Court is doing.
Right.
Isn't that really kind of odd at this point? But that's all I really wanted to say, Tom, and I appreciate you and I appreciate the show. And please get out, vote, tag, we're all it.
Amen. Thank you, Steve. Well said.
God bless you, sir.
Thank you. Back at you, Steve. I'll take all the blessings I can get. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. It's 52 minutes past the hour. Got to read an ad here on the commercial side, and then I'll be right back with you. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. You know, they often say that Republican Senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, is the stupidest guy in the entire United States Senate. I get it. Tommy Tuberville gives him a run for his money, but he just came out with what has to be at least the very stupidest idea of the year. Ron Johnson is proposing, there's a shortage of child care workers right now in America. There's a whole bunch of good reasons for that. But he has proposed a solution. His suggestion, any woman in America who's getting any kind of public assistance, you're getting food stamps, you're getting, tuition relief, whatever it may be, you would be forced to go into daycare centers and care for children. Yeah, seriously. This is Ron Johnson's idea. People who had no training, and one of his assistants said, well, it's just like teachers who teach in public schools where their own kids attend. No, it's not. These are not trained professionals. There's no union. This is nuts. There's a whole video about it over at TomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Let's see here. Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, what's on your mind?
Great show, Tom. Great show. Basically, I was calling in to respond to one of your earlier callers that suggests that a vasectomy might be a good alternative. Mm-hmm. And I was going to respond to her that black community would be very, very suspicious of that because, generally speaking, when the white community sets up a program such as that, black folks are always tend to be on the short end of the stick. So who's going to be making the determination who gets the vasectomy? Who's going to make the determination when it's all right to be?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, Earl. That was a tongue-in-cheek proposal, but and those are the kind of legislation that are done as performance art. But your point is well taken, Earl. Thank you, Steve in Whitehall, Pennsylvania. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I'm new to your show, and I want to let you know I appreciate it, and it's really great and informative.
But?
Also,
okay.
I just wanted to ask, it's bothering me. It seems that the Republicans are in control right now. I mean, we have the House, we have the Senate, we have the White House. It seems like the Republicans are getting more done than the Democrats.
Well, and I understand the Republicans aren't getting anything done, but the judges certainly are, yeah.
Right, which were appointed by, of course,
Republicans, yes.
How that went down also,
Yeah.
And the other thing with the abortion, I mean, they won't let us have $250 child tax credit per month, which is really peanuts if you think about it, but it lifted 5 million, kids out of poverty.
Yes.
So now if this abortion, if Roe gets struck down, you're going to have more kids in poverty,
yep.
And they can't even give a $250 child tax credit. How are these kids going to be taken care of?
That is because they are zygote and fetus worshipers, not child worshipers. Once that child is born, There are some progressive folks who are in favor of restrictions on abortion, and I acknowledge them and I respect them. But by and large, the Republicans are, once you're born, you're on your own. That's it. They're working to end food stamps. They're working to end Medicaid. They're working to end. They have already succeeded in ending the child tax credit. They just don't give a damn about children.
No, they don't. Or the working class people, and the families that are trying to make it don't have enough money to actually, support a family.
Amen.
And they're going to make them have extra.
Steve, I got to run. It's the end of the show, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, they're of by and for the rich folks. That's the bottom line for Republicans and their party. Steve, thank you. And thank you for being with us today. A big, consequential day in the history of the United States. We'll see what more we learn over the next 24 hours, and we'll rendezvous here tomorrow, same time, same place, and to continue the conversation, along with whatever other news has popped up in the meantime. So in the meantime, get out there, get active. Now, if there was ever a time to get politically active, this is it. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. Stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
We say